Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Colleen Murphy, and I am here as the writer-in-residence, and I'm a playwright, so I'm working on and investigating character. First, before we do anything, I would like to thank Mark Vesely for bringing me here to this beautiful city.
Just because I don't have.
I'm just going to put this so elegant back on so that people can see our guests.
Perfect.
Yeah, that works. It's not going to detract from anything else.
Okay, thank you. First, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. In the Canadian theatre world, Mark Youssef is a national treasure. He received Canada's largest theatre award, the Seminovich Prize for Theatre, for his body of work as a playwright. He's also the recipient of Berlin, Germany's Icarus. Icarus. For the guy with the sun. Icarus Prize, the Vancouver Mayor's Arts Award, the Rio Tinto Alcan Performing Arts Award, the Chalmers Canadian Play Award, the Seattle Times Floodlight Award, the Vancouver Critics Innovation Award 3 times he won this. My goodness. And the Canada Council Staunch Lytton Award. He has created or collaborated on 15 plays, including Winners and Losers, King Arthur's Knight, Jabber, Awkward and Embarrassing Conversations, How Has My Love Affected You, Ollie, Ollie and the Act.
So exciting. So much excitement.
All righty. Well, here we are again. After that dramatic pause, the firemen are leaving, and we are all in one piece. I promised Marcus I wouldn't read his bio.
I think she should start from the top, right?
No,
we should hear it all again. One more time.
Okay. I'm just going to list the plays and then my second paragraph that I wrote about him. So, Marcus has written 15 plays, including Winners and Losers, King Arthur's Knight, Jabber, Awkward Embarrassing Conversations, How Has My Love Affected You, and Ollie Ollie and the Axis of Evil, and A Line in the Sand. He co-founded the East Vancouver artist-run production hub called Progress Lab 1422, which is a center for theater and performance creation in this city. He is currently International Artistic Associate at Farnham Maltings in the UK, a playwright in residence at Tarragon Theatre in Toronto, editorial advisor at the Canadian Theatre Review, and artistic associate of New World Theatre here in Vancouver, where he was artistic director from 2005 to 2019. Please give this wonderful artist a warm welcome.
Thank you, Colleen. Am I coming up?
I just have to do our little thing.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
I have to do our little thing. So I'm here, one of the things that I'm investigating as part of my residency is the notion of the creation of character. And one quote which has fascinated me for years, and I think maybe it influences me, I don't really know, is a quote from George Steiner from his book, The Death of Tragedy, and I'll just quickly read that quote. Quote, "Characters are, perhaps, those parts of shadow or independent vitality within the psyche which the poet cannot integrate to his own person. They are cancers of the imagination, insisting on the right to live outside the organism from which they are engendered. But whatever their relationship to the source of invention, dramatic personage assume their own integral being," unquote. So tonight, Marcus and I have decided on this particular setup. We have each written a provocation or a statement, which we have not showed each other. Marcus will speak for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then I'll speak for about 10 or 12 minutes. And afterwards, in, quote, a gentle, loving way, unquote, those are Marcus's words.
That's my phrase.
We'll question each other, probing beneath our words to unearth why we said what we said or why we wrote what we wrote. So, first up is Marcus.
Wow, thank you. Colleen and I have only gotten to know each other in the last few years. Oh, I think so. Yep, it's green. She can be so intimidating. It's really exciting. Thank you so much, Colleen, for having me and inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here at Green College. I did my MFA here at UBC, so I've been on the campus at various times and taught here a little bit. We agreed on provocations in relationship to this question at this time. Because that Steiner quote just made me, you reading it again, made me think about how true that feels artistically. This idea that they're the things we can't articulate or can't reconcile within ourselves. And how what we do, which is often represent real people, how that exists in relationship to a real world and real people who have real experiences and real lives. And so, in thinking about the question, whose stories do we tell and why, and what are our responsibilities in this time of change, I came up with basically just a list. And it's things that I think about in terms of this question. And I think about them a lot. In this moment of change, a lot of the questions that emerge out of this consideration about whose stories we tell and what characters we draw seem to have to do with what we call identity. Or sometimes it's twin, lived experience, which I'm not sure are always the same thing. In my experience, what we mean when we say identity, that which is who we are, is complicated. And I'll do what I normally do, which is use myself as a test case for that idea. Also, by way of introduction, slightly differently from my bio. My name is Marcus, as you know. My last name is Youssef. My middle name is Patrick. I'm 53 years old. I identify as racialized. My father was an immigrant from Egypt. My mother an Anglo-American who grew up in the States. I sometimes say that I grew up mixed race before that was actually recognized as a real thing. I became politicized about my identity as an Arab Canadian or as a racialized person during the first Gulf War in my late teens and early 20s when people tend to get politicized about their identities. That's something that happens. It happened to me specifically when I realized that American fighter planes, supported by the occasional Canadian CF-18, were bombing people in Iraq who looked like me. Now, Egypt was actually bombing too, a little bit on the side. So it wasn't like a national thing, but it was a thing for me. I went, oh my God, for the first time I went, those people look like me, and these people here, and in the broadest, most kind of like ridiculous generalization, I am not seen to look like them. That politicization, that sense of my identity as a racialized person escalated through 9/11 and the War on Terror. It fueled a lot of my work in the 90s and 2000s, a lot of the writing I did. But it's not my only identity. My parents had a sister. My parents had a child before me, my sister, but they put her up for adoption and kept it secret. I only found out about that when I was 16 years old during my parents' divorce. I come from financial privilege. My father was an international banker, a senior executive at the Royal Bank. And in fact, when my father died 2 years ago, very sadly, I inherited enough money not to stop working, but to not have to worry about what happens when I do stop working at a fairly normal age. And I know from how I feel when I say that, what that information about my identity means in our shared understanding of each other and society and culture. I'm a cisgendered heterosexual male, and despite some old person frustration with having to remember pronouns and stuff, I mostly feel really, really excited about the liberation the fluidity of gender has given me as somebody who I think has discovered as a 40 or 45 or 50-year-old man that I'm cisgendered het and male. I'm also femme. I'm pretty femme, and I wasn't allowed to be when I was growing up, and I feel much more permission to do that now. My mother and I were almost completely estranged until my sister contacted our family for the first time when I was 25. Shortly after we met her, my mother then developed early onset Alzheimer's, and my wife and I cared for her for 20 years through that while raising our small children. That's part of my identity. I am currently writing a play that draws heavily on my family's complicated story. And my guess is that all our identities, like all our families, are this complicated. Not in the same way, but equally complicated. Probably the only unusual thing about what I've just told you is the fact that I've shared it with you in this public forum, in a forum like this one. The complications are probably not that different than the complications we all share. So that's me. In relationship to this question, here's a few other things that feel true and that I think about. How am I doing for time?
Well, I'm just listening.
Okay. I am compulsively, as you have evidence already, driven to tell stories about my own experience. It doesn't feel like a choice. When I don't have a platform to tell those stories, I tell them to myself in my journal. I am as compulsively interested in stories of others whose experiences are different than mine, which has meant that I co-write and co-create a lot, and I think in part this is because it is the space between different experiences, a space that is often full of conflict, that fascinates me, capturing that somehow. Its complexity, its nuance, its confusion. And I think partly I'm a playwright, partly by accident, it's just what happened, but partly because drama is predicated on the concise and efficient use of conflict. I'm not like Colleen, a brilliant stylist. I am drawn to specific encounters or specific conflicts or specific differences, stories that emerge from encountering the other. So my work varies wildly in style and form. Borat-style political satire, Ali and Ali, she referenced that, plays for teens about the intersection of race and gender and class identities. Winners and Losers, an experimental play, which is based on a game that my buddy and I played, transcripts of this game where we named people, places, and things and debated whether they were winners or losers. My collaborations with Mal McNeil, an artist whose life includes Down syndrome, and many others. So here's some things that have happened along the way. This is my play Jabber. In the play, which is about it's for teenagers. Probably in a way the most performed play. It's been performed all over the world for many, many years. And in the play, it's about a Fatima, a young Muslim immigrant from Egypt who wears hijab and ends up, because of a racist incident, it doesn't really matter, in a school where there's no other Muslim kids and no other woman wearing hijab. The play investigates her relationship with a tough white kid, a boy, who's got a really bad reputation as being like that kind of asshole in the school. And they form an unlikely friendship and romance. It's a bit of a Romeo and Juliet story based on their shared outsider status. So that's the play. It's based to some extent on my experience as an Arab Canadian, whatever. I felt when I was writing it in 2012 that as an Arab Canadian, my family's Christian, but as an Arab Canadian, I felt like an appropriate kind of bridge to that experience, thought a lot about it, not Muslim, but thought a lot about it, have very specific opinions about hijab, I did some research, blah, blah, blah. I also worked with those asshole white boy kids in my 20s and 30s a lot, so based on that research too. Felt like I knew a lot about both things. Play has, toured all over the world, been a huge hit. But in a school in Vancouver, actually, a group of conservative, religious Muslim students saw it and were very, very upset. And they were upset in particular by a scene in which, after they formed their friendship, and the tough boy, Jorah, has revealed something in his past, his father's abusive father, that Fatima really moves Fatima to hear. They do a lot of video chatting, and this is set up in a play, it doesn't matter, but she takes off her hijab and shows him her hair, which is kind of a thing. This infuriated this group of students, and it turned into a big thing. What I loved about that moment in the play, and it has consequences, and I won't bore you with them all because I want to talk about a couple other things, but what I loved about it is her doing that. This play is about teenagers. There's 4 teenagers. Teenagers see it. Sitting in audiences, I could tell how much it worked with teenagers who weren't Muslim, particularly girls, but boys as well, in relationship to the idea of their sexuality and sharing their sexuality online, which is a thing they're all dealing with. But how do you talk about it? And I certainly couldn't talk about it in a play. But doing this opened that whole space up in the play, and you could feel in the audience. It was an amazing thing. But these conservative Muslim students were very, very, very upset. And we went through a whole kind of process, and I explained to them why it was important to me. I just told you one reason. I talked to them about how it was a play. Didn't make them feel any better about it. And it was a tricky one for me. I'm not Muslim. And though I did research and talked to friends who are Muslim, wore hijab, and did all those things, I place a lot of value on paying attention to the experience of those who are marginalized or experience kind of difference in a profound way in relationship to dominant culture. And in that case, I felt like I failed. Did I stop the play being done? No. But I felt like I failed. When teaching here in the MFA residency program, I can't remember her name. She was awesome. I saw a YA fantasy writer speak about the question of this question. Like somebody asked them in a panel, like, whose voice, etc. And she said it's like anything. Do your research. Talk to people. Pay them to respond if they're interested. Have conversations. Make yourself vulnerable to the experience you're hoping to learn about. The example she used, which I thought was really great, is if you're writing about a data architect, and data architecture is a central metaphor in your piece, you probably are not going to just be like, I'm going to write whatever comes into my head about data architecture. You're going to go and do research. She says apply the same principle. And to that I'd add, asking myself why I want to write that story or character. I let you know with Jabber why I decided I wanted to do that. It didn't satisfy those students, but it was enough for me. A lovely white friend of mine voiced something. I think most people, he's an artist, he makes theater, in his situation are afraid to say right now. He said, what do I have to write about? I'm a boring middle-class white person. Which I thought was hilarious. My response was, if that's what's obsessing you and worrying you, write about that. But he's like, I can't. I mean, I can't get a grant for that. Nobody's interested in that. And when he said nobody's interested in that, I said, well, maybe then you need to get interested in something else. But I'm desperate right now to hear the vulnerable, open voices of white people wrestling with the things that are occurring right now. As a brown person whose work has been platformed to some extent over the years, when it wasn't cool, I'm very curious about that. I remember teaching Sharon Pollock's play, Komagata Maru Incident. Is anybody familiar with that play? Yeah. In the early 2000s. That's a fascinating one to me. I don't know if you remember it. It's a great play. Sharon's a brilliant writer. Was a brilliant writer. But as I taught it to students in the early 2000s, I went, oh my God, all the brown people are victims in this play. Like they were just literally victims. And in fact, I didn't talk about it because I'm trying to keep my time short. But this play, Adventures of Ali and Ali and the Axis of Evil, a big chunk of that is actually a response to that. This is our war on terror satire in which we do deeply inappropriate things that I'm not sure we could do now, that we could get away with. But it was a response to that kind of, which I see now more. And I worry about this a little bit. And I don't know, I don't know how comfortable I always feel saying this. I saw my dear friend Hiro Kanagawa's play, Forgiveness. I don't know if anybody, I saw it like 3 days ago. Fascinating. So it's about Japanese internment, and it's like, and also the experience of Canadian soldiers in a Japanese POW camp, really, Mark Sakamoto's memoir, really interesting. But for me, don't tell Hiro I said this, although I will eventually, but it's like, all the good characters are good, and all the bad characters are bad. And there's no, and that's not based on race. There's good Japanese people, good white people, you know what I mean? Like it's not about race. But it's like all the good characters are all good, and all the good characters, and all the bad characters are all bad. And I go, ugh. That's not complex enough for me. There's a whiff of something really interesting in the play, for me, where the great actor Giovanni C. plays both a really good Japanese person and a really bad Japanese person. There's something about him playing both of them, but the costumes are changed, and it's all changed so much that you're like, oh, I'm not supposed to think about that. I wanted to think about that, because I think that's who we are. Now I'm close to over, eh? Yeah. Let me just sum it up. I had so much more, Colleen, but I didn't.
I know.
I write about things I can't figure out, encounters or experiences or events that I literally can't make sense of, in which my internal thoughts and reactions are contradictory or wildly inappropriate or just plain wrong. I do know that every time I write from this place, whether it's about politics I find outrageous, or working with people with Down syndrome, or the fucked up nature, excuse my language, of my own family, the painful process of trying to do the work necessary to represent those experiences and encounters as convincing or funny or moving or authentic enough that I can stand to imagine them becoming public, that process forces me to wrestle with and sometimes even push through my own assumptions, my own prejudices, my own judgments about those whose experiences are different from mine. I'll finish with diversity is our strength. That's a thing we hear a lot, and it's on posters in high schools. I think diversity is really hard because it's full of conflict. And that's why drama and storytelling make sense as a place to investigate it, because we can put that conflict on the page or on the stage. And I try to do that in a way that embraces that trouble and is responsive to both my own artistic impulse and the realities of systems and power and privilege, and how that is experienced very differently by different people. Not to mention other species. Maybe this will take us somewhere, and this will be my end. Do I think we should be prioritizing the stories or writing of those whose identities have meant that their experiences have been unnoticed, and in some cases denied and erased, and in others murdered? Absolutely, I do. I think that that's a good thing that's happening right now. Do I think we should be limiting our desire to responsibly, ethically, and creatively wrestle with experiences that are different from our own? No, I do not. I think that's the foundation of dramatic writing and all writing in some way. There we go. Sorry I went on.
Oh, bravo. Wow, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have so many things to say about that.
Oh, I bet you do. I can't wait to get down to
and I'm
it.
going to speak very fast because I don't want to. Okay, to create characters for my plays, I use a combination of imagination.
Don't go quite that fast. Yeah,
I use a combination of personal experience, of imagination, of research and consultation. This is from December Man. Jean, a young man who was in the classroom during the Montreal Massacre in 1989, and he's telling his mother a dream. In my dream, I start sprouting extra arms. Then I scoop up the wounded women until they're all in my arms. And I run out and down the corridor, covered in blood, running behind him, screaming, "You fucking cocksucking fuck. I don't know where all these extra arms are coming from, Mom." But I keep scooping up the women who are wounded, lifting them, holding on to them for dear life until I can hardly move, and I'm drowning in their blood. But I stagger outside and I get them to the ambulance in time, and no one died, Ma. No one died. And then I wake up. Question: do I have the right to write about a young man on the edge of suicide? Have I ever stood on the edge? If I have, why would I tell you? From Armstrong's War. Haley, a 12-year-old girl who uses a wheelchair. She's reading to a wounded soldier in 2008 in order to earn her community service badge as a Pathfinder. If you're not in the mood for a story, I can write letters for you to send to your friends. I carry a laptop with me at all times. Oh, you're too tired? But it took me an hour and a half to get here, which didn't count having to sit outside in the freezing cold because the mobility bus was supposed to pick me up at 4 from school, but it didn't come till 4:45 because the snow had slowed it down, and then he had to pick up 3 other people along the way. No, I'm not blaming the snow. It's just, I don't know. I assume soldiers had good manners, but it's probably your pain that makes you rude. That's why I'm here. I'm here to help you temporarily escape the pain of your wounds by inviting your imagination into other worlds. No, what? I'm not making assumptions about your pain. I'm just, no, I mean, I'm making conclusions based on evidence. You know, A, like you're in rehabilitation wing. B, you're lying under the bed, and C, you limp. So you're probably recovering from a physical wound, and you're also suffering from PTSD, because Miss Wren, like she's my Pathfinder leader, she told me that I should walk softly and be extra sympathetic because many soldiers come back from the war with PT. Okay, I'll stop talking. I'll just read. Question: do I have the right to write these words about a girl with spinal cord injury? Does my own disability give me that right? Or should it even matter? From a play, Down in Adoration Falling. This is Father Duvalier, a priest in 1965. I recall with delight my colonoscopy, which I watched live, semi-reclined on the X-ray slab, the screen nearby, watching as a filament equipped with a tiny camera made its way through, capturing in vivid detail the haunting landscape of my large bowel. It was a touch uncomfortable, yes, but by far the best film I've seen this year. Though not recommended for the squeamish, nor suitable for those who prefer that the lower extremities remain a seat, as it were, of mystery. And recently I spent a lazy afternoon in a laboratory slumped over an optical microscope, happily examining my blood with a stunned fascination that only the deeply narcissistic can muster. Question: do I have the right to create a Catholic priest who borders on being a pedophile? I'm not a pedophile, but I know a priest who was. Have I ever watched the screen while getting a colonoscopy? Yes, I have. Lived experience. From The Breathing Hole. Humituk, an Inuit widow in 1535 who adopts a polar bear cub and names it Angurjuak. Secrets? What secrets? I've never withheld anything from anyone. Not about my blood, not about my jealousies or my desires, or about the depth of my grief. My spirit breath is weak, my voice barely a whisper. Nuliayak, mother of the sea animals, you took my husband and my 2 children. I do not blame you. But I have been left with nothing, and so in desperation I beseech you, you who have the power over the animals of the sea, the power to release them to us or to withhold them, help me. There's no one left to hunt and fish for me, and I have no one left to care for. I have no purpose in my life. My spirit breath is dying. Help me. I have nothing. Where is my purpose? Why do I see the things I see? Nuliayak. Do I even have a place among these people, or do I have no place? And then she looks up and she spots a polar bear cub. Who is this? Who is this? Question. Do I have the right to create a fictional Inuit character when the only common thread that links us is that we are both widows? I worked on this play for 10 years, 7 of those years in some form of cultural and language consultation. Is this a crime? This is from The Good Night Bird, Parker. He's a homeless man who lives under the Bloor Street Viaduct in Toronto. Every morning I look for reasons to live. A wildflower in bloom, a trillium, a trailing arbutus. Oh, the smell. Like a woman in an evening gown, or the color of bluebells, or how the heads of buttercups bow under heavy rain. Like this. Just a modest bow. How dappled sunlight dances on the earth's floor, swaying in the breeze. Trees surrounding me like long green arms. Or watching an ant carry a dead insect 20 times bigger than itself. Now that's fucking impressive. That's like you carrying 2 hippopotamuses around on your back. So be impressed, lady. Imagine carrying 2 hippos, which is about the same as 3,000 squirrels. Oh, I love watching squirrels play. They're smart little lunatics. The 3 of them perch near my head when I'm sleeping. You want to hear other stuff? A, how it feels at night. How my cock feels at night. Question. Do I have the right to write about being homeless? Have I ever been homeless? Yes, once, very briefly. So what? How's the time?
Let me check.
It's okay. I'm going to keep going.
Oh, okay.
I'll stop.
It was a rhetorical question.
Okay. From Pig Girl. A Métis woman in Vancouver caught in the horror of the Picton farm. Once I sucked off a cop in his car, a plainclothes guy. He's moaning and groaning and nothing's happening. And suddenly he starts crying, saying he got divorced and he misses his daughter and how he feels like committing suicide. He said suicide and murder come from the same place inside you. That wanting to murder someone comes from the same feeling as wanting to kill yourself. You got a hard on just talking about that. So why don't you just go ahead and kill yourself instead of trying to kill me? Go ahead, you sick fucking loser. Question. Do I have the right to create a Métis woman who is raped and murdered? With research and consultation and cultural consultation? Yes. Have I been raped? I don't have to answer that. From Geography of Fire. Vaudreuil, the last Governor General of New France in 1959. We can hold Quebec if we make the British spread their forces and make them fight in the forests, where the militia and the native allies fight. The Abenaki, the Huron-Wendat, the Odawa, these warriors, man, they know how to fight. They fight from a place of cover, from a place of surprise. You remember Braddock, the smart British general? He marched in linear formation, hacking his way through a thick forest with 4 columns wide and 2 columns on foot in the center and a column of cavalry on each side. And yet we beat them. Why? Because French militia and natives hid in the trees and they watched Braddock march along like an idiot with his bugles playing and his stupid bagpiping grenadiers. Yeah, I mean, okay, I know he was English. That's my point. We lure this new English general, this General Wolfe. We lure him into the bush and he'll pull the same maneuver and then we'll decimate him. What do you mean? What do you mean Braddock's fate scares the shit out of me? It wasn't his fate, Montcalm. It was his stupidity. Question. Do I have the right as a writer to write dialogue for a historical person whose mother tongue is French? I was born in Quebec. I don't speak French. Okay. From Deliver Me, Tertius, who is a patrician, talks to his son in 251 AD. Lucius, Remember the reenactment of the Battle of Zama? We watched a slave playing Hannibal ride into the Colosseum, leading 40 elephants and 400 criminals dressed as Carthaginians. The Hannibal was a skinny kid, a magnificent red cloak falling off his bony shoulders. He sat atop an elephant, vomiting, because he knew that unlike the real Hannibal, who lived for 20 more years after Zama, he would not see another sunset. And then Scipio Africanus entered, played by that dink-ball gladiator with the red hair. He marches in with 600 criminals playing cavalry and blowing horns, just like the real Scipio did. And the sound of those horns freaked the elephants out so bad, they turned around and charged their own masters. Scipio's criminals cut down Hannibal's criminals, and they cut off the soles of Hannibal's feet and made him dance on a pile of salt. But the worst part, Lucius, for you watching that day, was when Scipio's men went after the elephants, slicing off their trunks. And they stumbled around, trumpeting their unbearable lamentations as they were dying. And you threw your cloak over your head and buried your head in my chest, whispering, "Father, help me, help me." And Lucius, now, please, I want you to help me. Question: do I have the right to construct a fictional Roman patrician who is 5 minutes away from being arrested? Have I ever been arrested? No, not yet. And the final one, a beating heart cadaver, Leona, whose daughter died in a car accident. I read about a woman with 3 kids. They were hiking in the wilderness when a cougar sprang out and started mauling the little boy. The woman grabbed a stick and smacked the animal. She kept the cougar at bay so the other kids could take the injured boy and get help. The kids met a man in a truck, and he drove back to rescue the woman. But all he found was her jacket on the ground. So he shouted into the woods, and then he heard the woman weakly asking if her kids were safe. I imagine her lying there, the cougar tearing at her chest, lying there listening to that man's voice, listening to that voice coming from the far distant shore of life, and shouting loudly that yes, yes, your children are safe. And then she closed her eyes. And do I have a right to create a mother who has lost her child if I haven't lost my own child? I'm a mother. I can imagine agony. Enough said. Thank you.
Woo! Are we standing?
We're standing.
Are we standing? Okay.
Yes. And I know.
It's 5:02.
It's okay. We've got some time. Just watch that.
Can I propose?
Propose.
That we, just because we started late, obviously, and I certainly went on, we take 10 minutes now to have our little discussion and then kind of see where we are at and open it up to people.
Yeah, let's
should we do that? So I'm going to actually set my timer. So this is actually part of Awkward Conversations, this show I made, so I know what I'm doing.
We know what we're doing.
We know what we're doing. Okay. I have things to say too, but first, what an amazing, just beautiful reader of your own beautiful writing you are. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I wish I'd done some reading, but there you go. Too late.
You took notes.
I did.
I didn't. Okay.
Who's going to start?
You start.
Okay. Were the questions you asked after each of those beautiful, truly, I'm such a huge admirer of your work. The questions you asked, were those real questions?
Yes, they were real questions.
Do you question your right to write any of the things that you read?
Yes, I do. I mean, I do all the time. I question them.
Can you share an example from something you read that you?
Well, in the play Pig Girl, initially in the first draft, in the reading, in the workshop, the dying woman, the woman is killed by Picton, was white. And I spoke with Yvette Nolan, who's just an amazing artist here in Canada. And she suggested, if the woman is white, then the Indigenous women disappear all over again. So I took a chance she helped me with the dialogue in terms of what would be said. This dying woman is Métis. So I did. I wrote that character with Yvette's help, as a Métis woman. And I put her I grew up in Northern Ontario, up north of Superior, and I kind of put her in that area, because I did a lot of paper research as well. And I took quite a bit of flack for that. And so it really made me question what, right did I have? And I figured, well, with consultation, you have a right, although you take a terrible chance. People can be very angry.
I am struck, listening to your work, by something I was thinking about, and it's like, it's also not just the right or not the right. It's what the actual work is. And everything you shared and your writing is full of such life and complexity that those questions don't come up for me in the same way, generally speaking. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, when I was listening to you, I was like, no, yeah, of course, yes, because I'm hearing the work, I'm hearing the voices. I mean, I think the Pig Girl one is really interesting because of all the stuff that happened, and there's stuff to talk about there. But I was struck listening. I was like, right, but the work is really good, and I buy it, and the kind of complexity and stuff that I was talking about is happening there, and so those questions are less acute for me. At the same time, listening to the girl in the wheelchair, I mean, you have a version of that experience. Inevitably, somebody whose life experience includes a wheelchair is going to have some kind of. I guess my thing is like when someone gets upset, is that a problem?
It doesn't stop me. The girl in the wheelchair had an accident 3 years before the play starts. So it's not like she had no physical experience before that. I'm going to use the breathing hole about the Arctic and the polar bear as a really good example of years and years of consultation.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing that work, right?
And I think that if you're going to if I'm going to take something on, that's not me, because I do not like talking about myself, it has to be good, or I'll be ashamed, or I can't defend it if it's crap, if it's stereotypes. Please, I hope the person I'm working with will say, that's a stereotype. But I also have to do it just as dramatically. I mean, one of the things we talked about in the breathing hole is that the structure of that play is a huge tragic structure based on Greek tragedy. It's not an indigenous structure which is circular. Mine is linear. So I'm putting a story that has quite a bit of Inuit characters into a play that is built on a Greek structure. But I don't see why that can't be so if the research is done, if the consultation is done. Because I'm interested, it's my job to offer you people the drama. I can't offer you the cultural consultation. I can't offer you the research, right? And I can't offer to make you feel good about that. Finally, what I can offer you is the drama. And if the drama's not there, I'm offering you nothing. Anyway, long answer.
All good. You asked me a question.
Well, that's really hard because you're so... because you have such a history of collaborating with people. And you don't say, okay, I'm the author, and, this is how it's going to be. So, when you get an idea of something you want to write about, do you immediately think, oh, I'm not going to write this alone? I mean, I know you're writing a play alone, right? About your own family?
Mm-hmm.
But what about another thing that interested you? Is the first thing you do go, okay, who am I going to collaborate with?
No. I mean, a bunch of those, like the collaborations are just kind of what are because because of the relationships that I have with people. But when I'm writing, well, the vast majority of the writing alone I've done has been based on my personal experience.
A lot of people do that nowadays. I mean,
I've been doing it, yeah.
But there's a lot of high status in drama for lived experience. And I have oh, you know what? I'm not going to talk about it. Let's open it because we're,
Okay.
But I know we'll argue about it because it's not really an argument, but. Oh, yes.
How about beginning with this understanding? This understanding of lived experience, and I struggle with, maybe I'm trying to superimpose something, but that phrase has a great lineage in phenomenology, in philosophy, and maybe that's colonialism. I don't know. But there is a real sense of a need to do profound research in order to understand lived experience. It seems to me that now there is a bit of an abnegation to somebody who had an experience, has lived a certain way, that they have more claim to the authenticity of understanding and so on. But I would suggest that from what I hear from you, you may have more authentic renditions of what that experience really was, in terms of maybe not the identity that they feel, but certainly how they experience the space they're in or the relationships they have, or time, because that's a big one with lived experience. How do we understand our relationship with time? So I don't know, just this understanding of lived experience, it has a whole new understanding in this day and age, does it not? What do you bring to that?
Can I jump in on that one?
You may.
Thank you. Are you sure?
Absolutely.
So I'm fascinated by this question because I agree. We're in a phase right now where it feels more than ever before that if something happened to me, I can now just say it to you and it is an authentic kind of cultural product, right? That it's like, this is enough. And for me, I've been investigating myself and my own experience and performance from the beginning. It's kind of what I do, or one of the things that I do. And where I think for me that, in addition to the rigor and all the style and whatever, everything Colleen brings to the work, for me, what's critical, whether I'm co-writing with somebody else and trying to create something together, or whether I'm writing about my own experience on my own, and it's the great artistic pleasure in the work, is that I have to find a way to not privilege my own experience. I have to find a way to have it exist. In order for it to work as performance, it has to be as, I have my own experience. Oh, that's okay, we got lots of time because it's still only 10 after. I have to be complicit. I have to be the bad guy too. That I can't just be the good guy. And there's a really good example of this in the play you just worked on with Itai Erdal, who's a local lighting designer, but also a creator who wrote a play about his experience in the Israeli army that Colleen co-wrote with Itai, called Soldiers of Tomorrow. And I'm just going to say, I saw an earlier draft, a reading of an earlier draft, and in it, Itai's telling a story, and he's doing it for all the right reasons. He's like, he wants to wrestle with this thing that he went through, like in the West Bank, like oppressing Palestinians from his perspective, mine too, and how complicated that was, and how, all these complicated feelings about that and the situation there and all those things. But through it, unintentionally, in my view, and this is the feedback I gave afterwards, I could feel Itai in the writing and in the performance going, but I'm like not wanting to look like a bad guy, wanting to show himself to be a good guy. I know this was wrong. I know I was wrong. And then you guys did some fabulous work on it. And when I saw it at the Push Festival, Itai was more vulnerable and more complicit and more willing to look like a bad guy. And so I was able to actually be with him as he told the story. As before I was going, yeah, okay, you're telling me your victim story. Like you're trying not to, but you're telling me your victim story.
Well, there's Tennessee Williams, the great American playwright. In a Paris Review interview years ago, somebody said to him, "Oh, your plays are autobiographical." And he said, "No, they're not autobiographical, but they're emotionally autobiographical." And to me, that's it. Somebody has a question.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Fascinating. I just thought the cancers of the imagination is really sitting with me, and also, Colleen, your questions are about, in a way, you're like, do you have a right to write in this voice and with these stories? And when you started, with the Steinberg quote, it's almost like and you were saying this the same, almost an obligation to speak those stories. But I also wonder if there's like a permission to speak more stories now. Like, I just wonder if the opposite is also true. Like, do you feel it's a calling to expand the types of voices? And if you have the skill that you both have to bring the drama to other stories where people then say, oh, I hear myself represented. And just like you're saying, maybe represented in ways that we're almost vulnerable to try ourselves, right? So, because I think there's one way where we say, oh, do you have the right? But then also I feel like there's an opening, just like you're saying about gender fluidity, there's an opening for more stories. And then if you have an ability and you feel the muse is drawing you to a story and you're honoring and consulting, in a way, do you have an obligation now to expand the story base or the types of stories you tell? Mm-mm. Do you feel like it's a cancer? Do you feel like it's an opening? Is it a
It's an opening,
muse?
but it's not an obligation. Because, writing a play takes a long time. If you're not, whatever sparks you to make you spend the next 4 years for like a $5,000 grant to be, dogged about making a piece of theater, it can't even be a conscious thing. Sometimes you're drawn. I was drawn to the climate emergency and this idea of this woman adopting a polar bear, and this huge play came. But you can only respond to the world as a playwright to what you can respond to. One cannot feel obligated to anything, because then, well, then what happens?
I don't know what happened.
I don't know.
No.
Something must happen.
I disagree, not with we must do what we're drawn to and the pittance we get for the unbelievable. I don't disagree. And this is the difference in our practices too and where we come from. I often create work in community, and part of what I feel my responsibility, my obligation is right now as someone who has chosen not in this time to take on institutional positions of leadership in a way because I don't have to. I spend a lot of time working with writers who are attracted to me because of the kind of writer I am and the background that I have, and helping them understand how it is that it can't just be their victim story, that it has to be more than that. Mm-hmm. Because I see it as my responsibility as I watch my young, formerly marginal colleagues be elevated very quickly in the institutional system and having their plays picked up and produced when they're pretty green. I feel it's my responsibility to work with them to try to help them, grow and develop as writers as well. But I absolutely believe this is an opening and an opportune time, not just for the types of stories, but for people who wouldn't have had a shot in hell at getting a show at the Arts Club or at a big theater. Like in a million years. Like I had to run my own company to get this stuff happen. Like, and you know, Carmen's coming, right? Carmen Aguirre is going to be part of this thing. And I mean, we laugh about it sometimes. We're like, oh, we had to do it all ourselves. And not that for anybody getting a play produced is easy, but it's like we watch now the attention being paid to the questions and concerns we've been wrestling with for 30 years, and go. But my choice is to go, no, like this is great, and now I need to do that work with them. Yeah.
I have one more question, and
Okay.
that's it.
And then
One
there's
more question
one
time.
Yeah.
You have to 6:30 anyway, and if anyone needs to leave, they can always walk out. So if there are more questions, the bar will still be open when you get out. There's one question online.
Online question. That's so exciting.
It's the role of imagination and its intersection with empathy. Discuss, please.
I have a line in a play that actually Sir John Franklin says when he's staring out at the landscape. He says, imagination is all we have. And I think imagination intersects with everything. To have no imagination, I just can't imagine how you look at all the other things without that feeling, because I'm so inarticulate, sorry. I'll just pass it over to my guest here.
No, it's good. No.
I mean, imagination is everything to me, but anyway. Talk about how it intersects.
Okay. I'm going to respond. How does imagination and empathy intersect? And I think that they intersect, or what comes to me, what?
Because you offer people an emotional journey. I want people to laugh and I want people to cry. Full stop. If they don't laugh or cry in my plays, I have fucking failed. And so empathy is in there somewhere, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll talk about this play, Winners and Losers, quickly. It's the one where my buddy and I played a game called Winners and Losers. We named people, places, and things, and debated whether they were winners and losers. Recorded all, had them transcribed, edited them into, and it got very personal over the course of the play. We toured this play for 5 years. We competed, and in the play, we're trying to win each debate or whatever. It was mostly rehearsed, but we improvised within it. And we had license in the play to change not the overall structure or anything, but to change the way we said things, and to try to get each other, because we were trying to win in front of the audience, the two of us. We toured this for 5 years. We were on the road for 5 years. The play's climax kind of happens when each of us tells the other why they're a loser. And we have license in those monologues to use things that happened that day, to add things that actually... So this is the kind of like theater of the real kind of thing. Touring that play for 5 years, in the bad times, I would spend all day walking around, like trying to obsessively think about how I was going to get Jamie that night. But over the course of doing this exercise with him of 5 years and staying friends and getting through it, I came to learn so much more about myself for real through the act of us doing this and being honest with each other. And I'm not sure I'm getting to imagination here.
Empathy. Maybe?
But I am getting to empathy, and it was the act. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's not a great answer, but it's like, it is the imaginative act of going out and doing this thing over and over and over that produced this, it produced this unbelievable empathy for him that I never thought would have been possible. Anyway, that wasn't a great answer. I'm going to try one more quickly, which is this one, which is my collaboration with Niall McNeil as Down syndrome. Just trying to think how to do this quickly. We write, so Niall and I were asked to write a show together. He identifies as a writer, doesn't really write. we figured out a way to write together where I would just record again everything, and we would jam about Peter Pan, which became Peter Panties, and King Arthur, which became King Arthur's Knight. About half, when we started doing this, and we would be jamming, half the time I'd be going, oh my God, this makes no sense at all. But then because I'd recorded, I would go back and listen to the tapes and realize that I actually just hadn't understood what Niall had said, and that his riffs were actually these unbelievably, like they made, not always logical sense, but amazing associative sense. Through that process of imagining with him, my entire relationship to him changed, and became then, in the second show, a company of actors that included 3 other artists with Down syndrome who were capable of so much more than I ever imagined possible when we began. It was the act of us imagining together that actually made it possible to see what they were really, really good at, and they are really, really good actors. Yeah.
That's a great answer.
Thanks.
Wow. Oh.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks. I'm Julia, and I study theater and performance, and particularly representations of older age. And so I'm going to offer a perspective about imagination and empathy that my example comes from stories about older age, but it could be applied to stories about disability or many other things. So I think plays help us train our imagination. Help us train our imagination as to what is possible and what we expect might be our possible futures or experiences. So in the case of older age, plays can help us imagine what it might be like, but they can also limit our imaginations as well, right? So we, and the way that relates to empathy is if we see, it helps as we sort of come to understand, as we're trained to understand what's possible or probable or maybe an option, that helps open up what we can empathize with, or what we can see as an acceptable story, or what we might be trained to think of as pathological, right? It sort of also trains how we express our empathy or understand empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm.
Could I say something? We still have time. We're not even at our usual time limit for these things. Partly suggested by your quotation of Tennessee Williams and the idea that there are emotions in this play, but what their relation is to any of mine is neither here nor there. Further, though, to Marcus, you talking about the play and the Push Festival that Colleen collaborated on, which was almost a one-man performance by its other author.
Pretty much, yeah.
Its, I guess, primary author, Itai Edal. Yet, and I don't think there was any credit for your authorship on any of the publicity.
Oh, and it was digital.
Right. So you weren't going to be held responsible for any of that in any public way. And it occurs to me, actually, there's no particular reason why Itai Edal should have been held responsible for it as the writer either. All that mattered to those of us who were in the theatre that evening was that this was a drama that was being offered to us. You said, your obligation, the one you do acknowledge, is to offer a drama. If there isn't drama, you have failed. There was a drama. It so happened that the guy playing the main role, we were led to believe, not only identified with that character, but in a certain sense was that character who was playing himself. But it didn't seem to me in any way necessary for the success of the play that we should have known or assumed that, any more than we needed to know that the guy who was on stage had also written it, any more than we needed to know that you'd had a hand in the writing of it. Now, there is a scenario here which isn't going to be possible, so this isn't a solution to anything, but it's a theoretical scenario where we stop being so hung up on the personality of our playwrights. It would spoil occasions like this. I don't know how we'd know who wrote the plays anymore. But if we didn't know who the plays were written by anymore, and we didn't have this constant feeling we've got to hold somebody accountable for this, the only question that would matter would be, there's the play. You've seen it. You've experienced it. Was it any good? T.S. Eliot had an idea for which he's been mocked ever since, of the extinction of the personality of the author. He said, here's the wasteland, don't worry about me, what do you think of the poem? But for some reason in our culture, from the ancient Greeks who decided it wasn't good enough to have these fantastic tragic dramas put on, but you had to have a competition every year to decide which were the best playwrights. So that, Sophocles got the prize one year and Aeschylus got another, so we know who these guys are. But really, if we were determined to make the most of the opportunity that drama, to say nothing of other verbal art forms, provides, we might want to insist that the people who write these plays keep well out of the way. Just as now when I have to write a letter of reference for an academic who wants a grant, I have to write a reference in a way that makes it impossible for any reader of my academic reference to infer anything about the personality or individuality of the candidate, because that might give scope for unconscious bias of various kinds. So I have to achieve a kind of extinction of the personality of the candidate in writing about that person. It's a pretty weird thing to do.
Opposite of everything I believe in, and I see it happen all the time in all sorts of communication. Wow, sorry, that gets me going.
So I don't think that's going to work for us in the academy.
No.
But we've got a lot of stuff we've got to work through there. And I don't think this is a solution to any of the problems that have been adduced, because we are going to, especially in this society, not going to be able to give up on our curiosity and interest, sometimes bordering on the prurient, in the personalities of the people who produce art for us. But in another world, could it work?
Are you throwing that to me, or are you taking it?
I think, yeah, in another world it could work. Sure, why not? I don't know how it would work, but there's bits of poetry that comes down through the ages we don't know the authors of.
I also think that, and again, I part of my practice comes from this kind of tradition, but it's just thinking about knowing Itai and what happens when we know that the person up on stage is actually the person. And it matters a lot to me because I know Itai. And it matters a lot less to other people. And sometimes I wonder, though, about the verisimilitude of knowing people are actually speaking as themselves. And you're right, it's not Itai. It actually isn't even Itai. It's Itai playing Itai. That's what we talk about a lot in the work. It's we're playing representations of ourselves. Anyway, it's an interesting question. Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Sorry. I think, for me, I think the question of, it's a question to grapple with as a writer who has do we have the permission to tell this story? And we grapple with it. And I wrote it in my play's liner notes that I don't know if I have the right to write this. Do I have the right to write this? And who gets to ask that question and why? Because sometimes it's important to have the responsibility, but sometimes it feels like a lot of discussion, and you wonder about the discussion itself, where it's coming from, if that makes sense.
It does to me.
Yeah.
And I think, sorry, you going to say something? I don't want to.
Yes, there's a lot of discussion. And then there's discussion about the discussion, and then there's discussion about the discussion about the discussion. And where do we go from there?
Yeah, sorry.
And I can only speak as a playwright, right? There's if I decided to write a play about a particular subject matter and, somebody said, no, you shouldn't write that. There's an old Jewish saying, if 20 people tell you you're sick, lay down. So if 20 people are saying, well, Colleen, man, you shouldn't be writing about that, I would probably not write about it. But But I can't write I can only write based on how I feel about things in the world. That's the thing I've stuck to since day one, for better or for worse, in richness and in poverty. No, and since day one, that is the only thing that I try to follow, and I try to follow it respectfully, consultation and with research. And, or, you know, there's a play I've just finished writing that I had no research and no consultation because it's, you know, the lower class place where I came from, but it's not about me. So that's all I can do.
Yeah, I think you can't beat yourself up. And I talk to young writers about this all the time. Like, you can't have the judges in your head doing that thing. Like, that doesn't help. At the same time, I believe that what you said is true. We have to do that thing. And at the same time, opening up space, and speaking as an artistic director too, opening up space, being interested in voices that we haven't heard is critically important. And that's the good side for me out of what's been happening. The bad side is like people shutting themselves down and all these questions about rights, and you know, and I just kind of go, make the work good as you can, as you do, and successful, then those questions will answer themselves. But I do think it's also really important for me anyway to acknowledge that the access that some folks have now to feeling like their stories are legitimate is relatively new.
And the theater can stretch, eh? Because theater is a state of mind.
Just exactly.
Like, it's not like, oh, you have to move away, you have to get off the stage so you can get on the stage.
Exactly.
The theater can stretch and open up like this.
And wasn't there like an adaptation of Pig Girl?
In Akwesasne.
They adapted it, right?
Yeah, they adapted it. The Mohawk, this Mohawk group of women adapted it, and one of them sang an opera piece. Oh, it was so beautiful. And all of the women played all of the parts.
So those are people saying, we see your play, but we want to take it and remake it. And you said yes.
Well, they didn't remake it.
Or re-adapt it.
I don't let people remake my shit.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry.
No. But you know what I'm saying. I said that they can adapt it. They added the opera and they extended a scene, and that was great because they were investigating the play from their perspective.
So this play, Winners and Losers, which a good friend of mine called, she came out, she hated it. It's very male and competitive, and she came out.
And why is male competitive? Like, that's why I just, you know, it's like male and competitive, toxic male. Like, I'm so tired of that.
Okay. And what she said when she came out was, I know what to call that. That's the testosterone dialogues. It was a vagina monologue. Joke. Anyway, and then two colleagues, a colleague, Jenna Rogers from sort of mid-30s from Banff and Calgary, said, I want to make this play with two women. And we have a guide of how to adapt it for two different people. And our difference, Jamie and my difference that kind of drives it is I'm a brown guy from financial privilege. He's a white guy from super working class poverty. They paired up a older white actor and a young black actor. So they had an age thing going on in the dynamic and remade the play using using our play, but remaking it. That, to me, is thrilling.
Of course, absolutely.
It's thrilling, because it's taking these kind of examinations and opening, like that.
Also, it's a great thing to test the play.
Exactly.
It tests the text. You put it in someone else's hand with somebody else's point of view, with somebody else's casting, and if it falls apart, that's the text's fault. Yeah.
And they actually, in this one, had to add their own stories, replace some of the things so that they were about them and not about us.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Anyway.
Okay.
There's a conversation
Here's
starting
the
now.
man.
Paula, one more from the main house, please.
Is that on?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Well, I feel like part of this conversation is that we're dealing with different levels of truth and knowing, and representation of certain groups is one kind of knowing, and the ways that you are telling us that you get at it with consultation and research and personal experience and empathy and all these parts are ways of complexifying that wonderful thing. But for me, part of the question is, how do human beings know each other? And is it possible to know each other? And what does it mean? Does it mean that you have to have personal experience in order to understand somebody else? Well, humans have been around for millennia, and I think there are ways of understanding each other across barriers. And part of that is a personal kind of artistry, which the playwright needs to have in order to convey. So I just feel like I don't think that the product can be separated completely from the author, because if we want to understand, if we take the play as a kind of representation of that representative truth, well, then that gets tricky. But if it's dealing with ways of understanding humanity, even if it's culturalized, even if it's genderized, if it speaks to people, then there's something to be said. I just feel like that we're getting mixed up in kind of categories of knowing, in a way. So I just putting it out there. It's not a question. It's just a comment.
Cool.
Very cool.
One of the things I think about a lot these days is how we attempt to know each other kind of socially or culturally through a mediated binary platform, which is online communication that is driven by literally binary structure. One of the things that I find super exciting about knowing in the theater is that it's embodied, and that we are here in our physical bodies with each other, and those bodies in this forum, it's fairly presentational, but our bodies are talking to each other in other languages right now. And that wasn't possible on Zoom when we were all adapting. You know what I mean? And for me, a critical part of what we do in terms of knowing is the physical relationships we have each other in this form.
And the ability to feel, and to want to feel. You don't go to the theater and, it kind of open your heart.
All we ever really expect from our writers in residence at Green College and their guests is that they set the coach house on fire.
Yeah, that's what we
We did it.
We did it.
There's a fire extinguisher over behind the bar. Let's go get it, but not before we give these players a round of applause.
Thank you. Good job.
I could talk all night with you.
Yeah, well,